very pleased to be with you this morning. Hopefully, my internet's better than last episode. It seems to be keeping up just fine. Um, I'm your host today, Steph, and I'm joined, of course, by Trevor and Bray. And we are here to cop out this morning hard. Okay, we are here to talk about the presidential debate.
Woo!
I was telling my friends here, I have very few people to talk about this with. I'm a teacher, so I can't talk about this with my students, not in a meaningful way. I don't want to talk about it with the people I work with, and my closer friends. I mean, we've become less political as a group, and I prefer that. I like it. You know what I mean? The people I see like every day, like my roommates and whatnot. So if you are itching to hear some unqualified opinions about this debate, you're in the right place. All right. So I want to start it off by asking Bray and Trevor their general feelings about the debate. All right, and we'll get more specific as we go along. Okay. Who wants to go first?
I could say something.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So the debate, that's what we're here for. Good to see you again. Episode 36, I think, right?
36
All
is
right.
better than 35.
It is. It's on its way.
Give it up.
All right. So that political debate was the funniest fucking thing since the last debate. I enjoyed it so much. It was so good.
It's like I keep saying, it's more and more like WWE every day.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's just funny. It was just really funny. Like from the start to the end, it was just funny to watch. I got a big chuckle. I got a big laugh. It was good. It was good. But really though, my vibe from it when I first watched it is that Trump made no sense, and Kamala Harris wasn't good. It's just that she didn't not make no sense, or that's a bunch of negatives there.
Mhm.
So Trump made no sense, and then Kamala Harris didn't say anything particularly useful, or except for some ideas with her plans. But she did, in fact, not do what Trump did, which is say a bunch of weird, crazy shit for the entire duration of it.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah, so that's basically the vibe I got out of it. We can get into the specifics, but essentially that's what we got. Yeah, and then therein we could start talking about cats and dogs and
For sure.
and
So
all sorts of things.
I want to tell the dear listener today, we are not focused on the positives. Okay, no, we mean about this debate. If you want to be in an echo chamber and hear the positives about either candidate, you're probably in the wrong spot. Okay, for real. Bray, what do you think? General feelings.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So my general feelings about the debate, I think it was better overall than the last one. That's not saying a whole lot.
I was just about to say that's not saying anything.
And just be clear, you're talking about the Biden Trump debates, right?
Yeah.
Correct. I think Trump did. Honestly, I think both candidates did the usual. Their usual shtick. Trump, went off and galloped along with his usual narrative about immigrants, or they're doing this, they're doing that, the country's falling apart because XYZ. And then Kamala Harris did the usual classic liberal Democrat. We just can't allow this to happen. We've just got to take back our hope and we've got to move forward. And it's just like, after you listen to that sort of messaging for like 20 plus years, and yet it feels like very little has been accomplished, it's like, what are we doing?
So look, I'm so happy that Bray brought this up. That way I don't have to bring it up. You know what I mean? Bray is probably the most left-leaning person on this podcast. And it's just hilarious to me that he's bringing up the fact that, it's this turn the page business.
Right.
Please
and
do.
I get the message that Kamala Harris and Democrat mainstream are trying to bring. Like, we can't make Trump normal. Like, we can't allow that to happen. But it's, I don't know. I'll definitely have some stuff to say as far as like how your opponent can drag you into having to use their tactics. So
I'm afraid so. And so, for those of us listening and watching, now's the perfect opportunity to tell you we do have a follow-up to this debate topic. So we'll see how long we linger on it. It could be just a while, or it could be half the episode, or maybe more. Okay. We will come back to that for sure. So my second question in general is what do we feel was the most embarrassing moment for either of them? Rather, not either, but both. I want to talk about the most embarrassing moment for both candidates. What do you think, Bray?
I think we know which one is for Trump. So we should let's try Kamala first. Then let's try to pin that down because there's a couple floating around in my head, but I'm trying to remember. What do you have?
So for me, the most embarrassing moment for Vice President Harris was just kind of like allowing herself to be interrupted. You know what I mean? Like pick any one of those moments. It's like you are not. I get that she's like not playing by his rules and not interrupting it and so on, but like he just steamrolled her in a lot of places to say some nonsense. Don't get me wrong, but a lot of people in this country are not seeing that what he's saying is nonsense.
Yeah, one thing you can take away from that exactly that is twofold. You can look at Harris's facial expressions. I know there was a lot of discussion that came out of that debate about the general body language that took place during the debate. And then as well, one of the major news publications, published that on every single topic, regardless of who got the first word, Trump always, for every single topic, got the last word.
I saw that same exact graphic.
Yeah.
I saw that same graphic.
And that required him to interrupt the moderators at least once, sometimes twice, in order to do so. Yeah.
So, I mean, I just don't understand why. Let's talk about the venue for a moment. Nobody in the room. Why? Like nobody was in the room except for the two candidates and the moderators. And then they had control over his microphone. Why didn't they just keep it shut off? Like I've seen so much rhetoric about how
that's true.
Trump did, so much better than she did. I've seen a lot of rhetoric about how she did so much better than him, from both sides. I mean, and the most rhetoric I've seen from the political right is Trump literally decrying every chance he gets. It was a 3-on-1 debate. It's like, okay, if they should have just stuck to the rules and just kept him quiet,
I think part of the No, Trevor, by all means, go ahead. I'm just going to say that I think part of the concern that maybe the network or other people involved have with that is that they don't want to seem like they are too. It's almost like
it's a sticky
the
situation.
Rules, like the fair rules, have become too left biased, so they don't want to.
Yeah. Well, the problem is with Trump is he says a lot of things that just aren't. So here's the thing. I heard this phrase just yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting. Is this phrase truthiness? There's sort of a truthiness to some things.
Yeah.
So which is like, it doesn't mean that it's true. In fact, it does not. I mean, to stress it, it does not mean it's true. But there are some things out there that people say that just like feel right. Like Haitians eating our dogs,
that feels right,
like
Trevor?
That,
right?
Sure? Yes, yes,
it
does.
Unlocks something deep inside.
Yes, it does. Because in the following way, it really confirms my own way of visualizing the world. It has truthiness. It completely conforms to the way that I've abstracted reality. If I were from this perspective, it's the same thing with immigration. And like I hear a story, like if I were like very anti-immigration, in a lot of ways I am, but not to the extent and not in the exact surface as what's going on right now. But basically, if I were, let's just say, very anti-immigration, and then like something happened where like I don't know, something, like someone smashed a car into this and they were an immigrant. Like there was a car like recently I was
Oh
looking into
yeah.
this thing with Springfield, and apparently some woman was killed while bringing her garbage bins down, and the person who killed her was like a Haitian immigrant in a car in Springfield, and now a whole bunch of people are angry about it. But the thing is, like you hear that story, it confirms your own biases. It has truthiness to it, and then you kind of sell it off. And furthermore, I mean to add in more things that have a truthiness to them, but aren't necessarily true. Like information, like people are eating their cats and dogs. That's actually turned out to not necessarily be false, but not actually substantive. No substantive evidence was actually provided. Like the lady who said that initially, that Trump heard it from, essentially said that she heard it from someone else, but provides no source. Like it's a he said, she said, and then it go all the way back, and then there's no source.
So real quick,
and that's truthiness.
Go ahead. So Trevor, like I want to disagree with your language there a little bit. I really, really hate that term truthiness. I don't know
But
where you
it's
picked that
there.
up.
It's around.
No, I'm telling you, it might be long-winded, but I prefer to call this political pundits, religious pundits, people who are in some kind of ideological framework. Their charisma lies in the illusion of continuity. Okay? What do I mean by that? Stories that gain traction have this continuity to them, this illusion at least of continuity. Like A leads to B leads to C,
Right.
And obviously through time. So, and this is what we mean to say as good scientists, for example, when we say the plural of anecdote is not evidence. It can't be, And so, like, I really hate that term truthiness because, like, I detest that.
Well, here's the reason why I bring it up, because I think it's really quite important in this instance when we talk about this debate. In the following way, Donald Trump has he doesn't have really very much truth. He has a lot of truthiness, though. A huge amount of it.
So I disagree. I think he has a lot of projection.
Let me explain.
That's a soundbite. That's a soundbite. It's like that's all you do is a soundbite.
Yeah, that is. Well, yeah, he does give a lot of sound bites. But here's what I mean by sound bites. Here's what I mean by truthiness. What he says is things that are beloved by his base, such as they're eating the dogs. That phrase, which coming back to it, I think is probably the most embarrassing thing he said. But
it's up there.
Yeah, it's up there. And there's many other things that he says, and a lot of them have no substantive evidence, such as in like going out there and saying all these things. And basically what happens is, and the reason why like it looks as if the news is like targeting only Trump, is because he's saying truthy things, not truths. And that can be an affront to his base because they see him constantly being attacked for what he says, because he's not saying true things. And then like they attack him, and then they go, wow, okay, it's 3 against 1. When the issue is that Donald Trump's way of encountering a debate is necessarily against the fundamental rules listed within the confines of the debate. And what's really scary about all of that is at the same time, it still could be valuable to look at it in terms of 3 against 1 in some instances, because we are, of course, talking about ABC and all that. It's difficult. It is, because I think a lot of both ends of it is true. I think it's true to say that he quite literally doesn't abide by rules, and that's the reason why they slapped him into the dirt whenever he said something wrong, rightfully so. And at the exact same time, it's like it's difficult because it's really hard to dissuade this idea that it was 3 against 1, that it was like the political media going against Donald Trump. Because in a wide sense, it kind of also is. It's both of those things. I think both things are valid, like what both sides are saying about the overall topic. Maybe one has more value than the other. I mean, that's what I think in the end, that's my conclusion, that I think he doesn't abide by the rules of a debate. That's why they slap him into the dirt so much.
Here's a knee-jerk conclusion for you as well. I just hate to see a dickhead, asshat get everything he ever dreamed of. You know what I mean? Like he's on the world stage and he's getting to talk over people. Like that's literally all he wants to do. You know what I mean?
He's very interesting.
A dick.
The juxtaposition of the juxtaposition of two of the most important people in the world. One of them who, career-wise, does not deserve to be there whatsoever, yet by dumb luck or sheer combined stupidity has ended up in this position to debate on the world stage for the most powerful position in human history, basically.
Basically.
Honestly, I'd say Stalin was probably the most powerful person and position in human history. That's a conversation we could have. I mean, there are checks and balances here.
Perhaps at that particular time. I mean, like right now.
Oh yeah, then there you are. Yeah, there we are.
Anyways, what I mean to say is that the juxtaposition is so baffling that this is just as it was in 2016, but worse now because of all of the compounding, Trumpisms that have piled up.
Bray, I hear you loud and clear. I mean, it really is like our entire generation is asking, when is this snowball going to stop collecting?
Exactly.
Like rolling down. When is it going to stop?
Yeah.
And that's
I can't help.
Yeah.
I can't help but think of that song. We didn't start the fire by Billy Joel. It's kind of like the vibe a little bit. The way that I've been feeling about it ever since like at least 2016. Like you kind of hear the bells start going.
One thing about the truthiness with Trump, and I've had a conversation about this recently, actually, maybe even only a week or two ago with somebody before this Haitian immigrant story took over the news streams, which I think is terrible too, because you look no further than the headlines to see all of the violent atmosphere that's going on in Springfield now due to just those remarks. It's almost like a reflection of what happened on January 6th. Big powerful man says a bunch of really bad things about a particular
some crazy people
thing,
get involved,
and people just go. But
well,
Bray,
that
go ahead.
In my opinion, would it does constitute a bit of a criminal act. I mean, we have laws in this country that prevent you from inciting violence like that.
Right, and yet, as people seek to go after Trump for that sort of thing, it's just another, another obstacle to get through on a point like that. But what I am trying to relay is that I think the truthiness, my angle on it is that sometimes the stuff that he says has just enough, and by just enough I really do mean just a kernel of some sort of truth in it, that it allows the base to take that, and they see one true thing, one thing that they can actually connect to reality, and that opens the floodgates. Yep. And because that was true, because there was a little bit of truth in there, they can.
There were concepts of truth in there,
right?
Yeah.
They throw that through
there
a prism,
platonic truths in there,
and create this whatever they want.
I mean, in some universe, Haitians are eating the dogs and cats.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
I'm sure an immigrant somewhere has eaten a dog or cat. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, is that I had a conversation with somebody a couple weeks ago who was like, who knows my politics, basically. And he is more or less joking around, being unserious, rather. But he came to me and he was like, "Hey, those immigrants are out in I think it was like Colorado or something. He was like, they're taking over an apartment building and trying to collect rent from people and doing all that, like basically, I don't know, some weird, doing crime. Immigrants doing crime was basically the gist of what he was trying to say. And he sought, the way that he said that was to amplify that more than what it just was. Like even if I took him at face value and I was like, I believe what you're saying just cuz. I was like, okay, immigrants are doing crime in Colorado. I was like, have you considered the fact that still immigrants commit vastly less crime than American citizens? And that just because one thing is happening in one particular place does not mean it is happening everywhere else. I was like, these people also make up less of the population, I'm fairly certain, than everyone else. It's like they take a little bit of something, immigrants are doing crime, they find something to match with that, and then it just takes over their entire conception
like I say,
of
it's
what's
the
going on.
illusion of continuity.
I think,
Right.
the illusion of continuity, that's a good way of encountering it. I do want to stress probably a better way of encountering the idea or the issue. So when someone comes up to you and says something like this and gives you a piece of evidence that supports the conclusion, such as like immigrants are doing bad things in insert state Colorado, I think probably the way to move forward from there isn't to say that it's not happening or to say that it's not an issue.
Oh, not at all.
It might be better to instead start having serious discussions about policy and politics and that sort of thing in regards to it,
Mm-hmm.
because this is happening, and now we have to say, okay, so what do we do? What is to be done? Why aren't the police getting involved? We have a rule of law in this
That's
country. Why
exactly what
isn't
I
it being
said.
enforced? Like, all right, so it's a serious problem. All right, so what's being done about it? Nothing's being done. All right, who can we talk to about something being done about it? So we can characterize problems all day. That's what people do on the news, like on CNN. They characterize problems, or on Fox News, they characterize problems. But that's not really. Uh, I mean, what does that do, really? All it does is I say there's a problem, and then you like reevaluate it according to a different purview, and now it
Mhm.
looks different. And then I look at it a different way, and now it looks different. But
The art
I
of the
think it's really quite
spin.
important at this moment when we discuss something like an immigration issue to actually discuss like what is causing the issue and what can be done for the issue. Not that it's not an issue, or not that it's
Well,
this or
so
that. If that's how you feel,
yeah.
let it be known. But I think that's probably a better way of encountering these problems.
So Trevor, like, I'm going to say something incredibly left leaning, more left leaning than I am, right? But so there's a very substantial argument, or at least a sound one, to say just because some moron says something does not mean you should start acting on that, right?
Mm, yeah.
So in other words, like, why waste your time with the claims that are coming out of the mouths of like truly imbecilic people? I
Mm,
mean, if this person like Trump is touting that this is happening without evidence, well, then I say we get our quota in and
yeah.
apply Hitchens' razor.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
which is proposed without evidence can be
Right.
dismissed without evidence.
Mm,
You know what I
And
mean?
look, I don't think
that's
it's
fair.
so much the idea that it's not happening. It's the way that Trump puts this narrative is that it's happening everywhere. It's rampant. They're taking over the country. Like,
Hmm.
I would never sit here and deny that people who are immigrants, whether they're here illegally or legally, are doing crime. Of course. Everybody does crime. I've done a
Every
crime.
group of people,
I guarantee you, most people in this country have have broken some sort of law at some point.
some kind of statute.
Um, now, my point was, like you said, Trevor, is law enforcement involved? Are they doing something? If they're not doing something, then that's on them, and obviously that needs to be fixed. But my main second point was that this is not like the narrative suggests. They are committing vastly less crime than actual American citizens. This is very much like a particular gripe I have with other left-leaning people when it comes to gun violence. People are very gung-ho about going after AR-15 violence because it's sensational, much like 9/11.
It's politically expedient.
And a bunch of people lost their lives in one terrible act of violence, and so that incites people emotionally, and we typically jump to action, and in some cases, like 9/11, overreact.
Mm,
But whenever these things happen, people are always going after AR-15s, and something that conservative people will come back with is, well, what about all the gun violence in Chicago, or what about all the gun violence in insert big city here? And it's typically like armed robberies or handgun violence, the more common ones that happen a lot more frequently but are not as sensational. And I completely agree with them. I'm like, here is an example of something where people will jump to this sort of sensational thing and then act like that's really what's going on all the time across the board, when in fact violence from things like an AR-15 are far more spread out. They're just more amplified. So I don't know. Just trying to relay another example.
Well, it
of
sounds
that
like
sort of
yes.
thing.
This is difficult because it's where you take a whole bunch of points, a bunch of things that have occurred, and then you're trying to evaluate them and counter them according to one overarching narrative compared to another, because these things are happening. These shootings with AR-15s, they're occurring, and you can corroborate them within this overarching narrative or within this other one. And the same thing could be said for things with immigrants, because someone who is like very far right leaning could say something like, "Well, we have an immigrant problem, like a very serious one," and they could list like, "Well, here are 5 reasons why we have a very serious immigrant problem." They'll go into these 5 things, and basically, if you wanted to, you could also take these 5 problems and then completely evaluate it according to the other means and say we do not have a problem. You could. It would be very whenever you have gray areas where it's not completely so totally obvious, such as like, I can't make arguments that the Twin Towers did not fall. I can't do something like that. But if you have something very gray on the very political like cusp of things that are yet to be decided fully, such as what's happening right now with immigration and exactly how we're handling it, exactly what's going on, how to encounter the issue, what is the issue, what can we do about the issue, while it's still being encountered, you can evaluate it according to both means, both pro-immigration and anti-immigration, using a lot of the same information. You just reassemble it in such and such a way to say that immigration is not an issue.
Well,
Sure, but it should
I think it was
be
a line from Twain, right? Who said, "There's lies, there's damned lies, and then there's statistics," right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
what you're talking about is deriving conclusions from the same body of data. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to have conclusions from, bodies of knowledge, bodies of data, whatever. And we're supposed to look at this and perform more experimentation to delete more and more variables to get closer and closer to the truth. And that's not what's happening.
We should probably also find ourselves, like we talked a few episodes ago now about rationality, and like there are many different ways of evaluating a reality with reason. And it strikes me at this particular moment as we encounter these problems and encounter all these possibilities. Essentially, we should ask ourselves, well, what exactly are we doing? What are we trying to get at? Like, Bray, what are you trying to say when we don't have an immigration problem? What is someone who's very right-leaning trying to say when they say we do? What are they getting at?
right.
And characterized in this way, someone who's on the far right will, their overarching narrative, whatever it is, like it feels as if their reason, the ordinate grid from which they organize all these things, is something like this country is great and the people in it are great and it has to be protected, and there's this like that sentiment protecting it and that.
Right,
And,
it's individualistic, isolationist. Like,
yeah,
we want to keep our American culture pure.
yes,
Don't leave these
Sounds like
violent
Hitler's Germany.
immigrants out of our country.
that's one way you could characterize it. It could be, and then
Obviously,
if you wanted
it's hyperbole, but
Yep. If you want to be very far left about it, if I wanted to look at it from more Bray's view, this won't be perfect, but it could be also something where you see the humanity within all of us and the struggle of man within the beating heart of each and every one of us, including the people on the other side of this dividing line. And it's more about creating a place for people, and we're all people. And then this discussion could happen where they could come in. It's just based upon what is the organizing principle from which you organize these thoughts, these concepts, and these statistics. And then it comes down to whichever one has, as gross as it is, whichever one has the most truthiness, where you find yourself deriving answers from, because they both use the same statistics.
Well, I would argue that it comes from whoever can most align their view with reality, which,
That's
from
what I'm
my
trying to say.
perspective, would be looking at the crime statistics and
Exactly.
realizing that immigrants
in the end, you're
do
correct.
actually do less crime, which would seem to work against the idea and the narrative that is very clearly being pushed that immigrants are violent and are committing crimes at massive rates and are taking over the country. We've got to deport millions of people somehow Another question that went unanswered by Donald Trump in the debate, for obvious reasons. He probably has concepts of a plan, but no real idea of how to do so. And that's what I mean is, it comes down to, at the end of the day, what was it? We had a really good soundbite from a previous episode where basically the idea was the evidence is all we've got. That's all there is. That's it. That's what it's coming down to.
Well, that's what I meant earlier, Bray, by suggesting that, let's say that we were assessing a community's crime, right? And then we, took polls, did studies, and this, that, and the other. They were asking one particular question. That's what Trevor's talking about. He's talking about, from that question that breeds all of this data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I feel he's talking about anyway. And so the key is to then go in there and ask different questions, eliminate different variables, see what stimulus provides what response, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whenever you're encountering people who refuse to acknowledge that there is that, for example, we just need more data. What are you supposed to do with those people?
Mm-hmm.
Well, like people that need more information before they make a decision?
No, I'm talking about people who refuse to believe that we need more data.
Oh, like they believe a particular way.
Well, so in other words, think about any given college freshman. They read one stinking paper, and then they go, "Oh my God, this research, this has got to be funded." I mean, like, this, that, and the other. It's like, bud, calm down. Like, you've read one paper. You know what I mean?
Hey, you know what? I dig your enthusiasm.
I gotcha.
Kid.
Yeah,
I dig your enthusiasm.
Exactly.
It reminds me. It reminds me when I first took my first class in ethics, and we were going through Aristotelian ethics, and it literally changed my life. And I was walking home like, "Wow, I can think."
That reminds me of my Com 101, where I was in my super atheist phase, and I did my final speech on why science is superior to faith as a way to truth.
Yeah. That feels like some great shit.
Like, have you ever broke out of that super atheist phase?
No, he has not.
No, it's just far more refined and
yes, far more refined. I agree.
Yeah, much more sharp.
Should we turn to turn our train towards another track here?
So, say again, Bray. You want to turn this towards something else, or do you want me to?
Well, I'm there's. It's hard to choose, honestly.
I have our next question if you're ready.
Yeah, sure. What's up?
So, like I said, we are not here to dwell on the positives. I keep hearing more and more the people around me suggesting that we should be more like France and keep these people on their absolute tippy toes. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, if you cross this line, you need to know that we're going to dig up bricks to deal with you if we have to.
Right, they're on their fourth republic at this point.
We seriously need to adopt a mentality that these people, these hyper conscientious people, let me explain what that means. That means that these people who are able to self-motivate so hard that they will do anything to get where they are. Trump has done anything to get where he's at. Vice President Harris has done anything to get where she's at. And you cannot convince me otherwise. You can play me all the sweet little family clips of Vice President Harris you want. I do not care. She has to be hyper conscientious to be where she is. So, that being said, they're getting everything they want. We have to start adopting more of a mentality like, here's the problems. We're not worried about grooming you and saying, oh, you did such a good job. Like, that's not what we're here for. And we all know that. So, what was your worst feeling from both? I'll give mine. As an example. So, my worst feeling from Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, was actually it disturbed me a little bit. Okay, I was sat there watching the debate, first time that night. It wasn't live. I think I was an hour past or whatever, or beforehand. And I had this thought. It kept occurring in my mind. I was like, Steph, she sounds like Barack Obama. And like I straight up have since been embarrassed to see that like a lot of the really really hyper right wing people on like YouTube have been pointing that out, and I'm like, I don't identify with them. You know, you don't identify with them, like, you know what I mean? But without completely unbidden, those were my thoughts. Those were my innermost thoughts. She sounds like she's been coached to sound like Barack Obama. Look, President Obama would crush Trump in a debate. Like it would be really cool to see that. But we're not going to. You know what I mean?
Two different eras. Yeah.
Yeah, two different eras. But her inflection, her mannerisms. I wish that she would be more like herself. That's what I wanted to say. That was my worst feeling about Vice President Harris. What do we think?
Well, I first off, I agree. It's a serious issue. It's difficult because there was, I think, so this debate, there was a lot writing on it. So much so that I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that they would do something like that, where they would coach her to sound and have more of an Obama mannerism, because they're not quite sure about Kamala Harris yet. They're not sure what her chemistry is. It's a bit like the first, in terms of being a president. She's been VP now for 4 years, but it's like in terms of mannerisms as a president, there's a certain kind of cadence that you'll be known for eventually, and like your personality will come out eventually. But it's a bit like the first season of a show like Friends, when like the actors don't quite know what their characters are yet, and they're trying to fill them out. It's not that, and I say this not trying to say that she's becoming a character or she's like an actor or it's all fake. I don't mean to say it like that. I just mean to say she's going to need to figure out what her mannerisms are, and until that time hits, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I'm sympathetic to this thing that she did and her coaches did, where they wanted the very best to make sure she sounded presidential, and they tried their very best to defeat Trump in this debate. They wanted to do whatever they could to do that, and if part of that was moving from like her current mannerisms to what the American people consider to be a presidential mannerism, then they were going to do it, and they were going to do it, and they were going to do it now, and
I mean,
whatever
look,
they can do to make sure they win this debate.
It could be a total coincidence. It could be that Barack Obama is a good orator, and that Kamala Harris is a good orator, and that those similarities are just that. They're just similarities. I'm perfectly willing to admit that. I'm perfectly willing to admit that, you know, when I orate, when I'm in front of a crowd speaking,
You kind of are right now.
there's a very good possibility that I use some of the same tactics. But it was eerie. It was seriously eerie to me how much she sounded like Barack Obama. What do you think, Bray?
I don't know. I probably wasn't owning in as much on her particular speech patterns as I was just the substance of actually what they were both talking about. But I do know that she's been criticized in the past for changing the way that she talks to a particular audience, to basically code switching, which I don't really try to dog anybody for. It's natural, in my opinion, that people you change the way that they speak when talking to different people. I think if it puts you in a position where you're being inauthentic, then it becomes a problem. But that's
what I'm worried about, is her inauthenticity.
Right, and I get that. I understood that that's what you meant by that, not just simply that she sounded different.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. Barack Obama, for also the criticism he got for the way that he spoke, I think speaks very presidentially. And so I think if that's the way that's what she chooses to adopt, then I think, you know, great. It would be really nice to have a president who can speak better than Biden, and also in a very presidential manner.
She's got much worse to choose from in terms of adopting speaking patterns.
Perhaps she'll develop her own way eventually, but I mean, as far as the overarching picture, that's probably the least of my concerns.
We're basically
go ahead.
Yeah, we're basically on season 1 of House of Cards, and we're not quite sure how they act yet. And that's basically what this is. It's the start of a new period, and things are getting figured out. If we wanted to move on a little bit, I'd love to hear what y'all think about Donald Trump and the most disappointing thing. in
Well,
reference to what
so
he said.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we get this right, Trevor. I wanted your worst feeling from
Yes.
this debate.
Well, for me, that's an easy answer. It goes right back to January 6th again.
True.
It's what he said.
Mm-hmm.
They gave him an out. They gave him an out. He recently had begun saying that they missed by a hair, like an angel's hair, like this
Yeah,
thing. Like
they
he
fed that
said
to
that.
him on a silver platter.
Yeah, and I was already aware of him already saying that like before the debate, and I was really curious what he would say now. And then like it came up this softball they gave him when he could finally give it out, which I think would have won him a lot more of the American people if he had finally admitted that he lost that election. I think that's the
But he
real
can't
thing
do
that
that.
yeah, a
He
lot
can't
of
give up the
Republicans.
narrative.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the Republican base that really don't like Trump. The reason why they don't like him is for that reason. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, to this day, there is no evidence. No evidence. I mean, you don't think anybody would have been looking for it? You don't think anybody would be providing it? There's nothing. And this whole thing with like Dominion and all that kind of stuff, that fell completely apart, obviously, because no one's
Mhm.
talking about it anymore. And it really never, there wasn't anything to it. I mean to say that I was really disappointed and really fearful when he said that, because quite literally, he has no reason to believe it. He has no reason to believe that he won that election. He still doesn't. And the only thing he said it for is to keep up his own narrative, and maybe because he believes it. And if he does believe it, then I fear for essentially the American people.
I want to bring up something, and I definitely want to hear Bray on this for sure. But I want to play Trevor for a moment. All right, and what I mean by that is, who is to say that in his depth of narcissism, that Trump has developed his ordinate, plane of working, his plane of thought based on the fact that he won that election. In other words, like, he has this entire narrative about it, this, that, and the other. That is his pole, as you would say, from which he,
Mhm.
that's his stake in the ground, where he moves. You know what I mean? What
Mm-hmm.
would you have to say about that, Trevor?
Well, I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, it sounds to me that essentially, here's what's difficult. I honestly cannot say. Exactly the way that he thinks. So there's a lot of
There's
people
no
get
way.
paid a lot of money to try to figure that out, and I don't think we're any closer or further. It vaguely feels as if he believes what he says. He might be a very, very, very good liar. That very well may be, but it seems as if he's convinced by his own words that he didn't lose that election. But I am not sure. If it is so that he believes that he won that election and all that, then that is an indication that he has ideas. He has thoughts about the reality, and then he changes reality accordingly to fit those uh, apprehensions of reality, his ideas of reality, and that's it could be a fun leadership trait sometimes, depending on what it is, but not in this instance, not in this case at all.
So
Trump has
It's a
the
complete
so
affront against
let me
just
ask Bray
plain
a
reality.
question. Let me ask Bray a question. At what point does it constitute a delusion? That's my question for you, Bray. And then, of course, you can talk about whatever you want. But, like,
Of
at
course.
what point does putting this stake in the ground, or this ordinate grid stuff we always talk about, constitute just a delusion?
Well, I think it constitutes a delusion as soon as you decide to accept it as fact when it's not. See, Trump is in a very particular position, as are many people in America, of having, or at least having had, money. So he has the privilege of his reality, using that very particularly. His reality can be whatever he wants for the most part because he has money.
And he's
So
always had
if he
money.
wants to believe or pretend that he believes XYZ about the election being stolen or illegals are taking over the country, he has the privilege to do so. And he can shape things to be whatever he wants so long as he has money and millions of people who are willing to do whatever he says. Now, we've talked about this before, whether or not he truly believes that stuff is hard to say. He acts like it, and maybe that's all we need to go off of, is the fact that he Seems like he does. He walks, he talks, he acts like it. Probably does. But moreover, and I watch these videos too of his supporters, and they'll ask people on the streets will ask his supporters, will you believe the 2024 election results if Trump wins? And they'll go, absolutely, absolutely. If Trump wins, then it's a for sure thing. And then they go, well, what if Harris Walls win? Will you believe the election? Oh, of course not. Of course not.
The
It's already made
definition
up
of
in these
bias.
people's minds. This election is already at a like quantum superposition for them, or like some sort of weird Schrodinger's cat thing. It's like it's already decided one way or the other
Right.
how they're going to believe based on the results, which is completely bonkers, like fallacious to the max.
Well, so real quick, Bray, just as a quick, thing in this, like I tell my students and I tell people all the time, that is the fundamental reason why, say, logic and science are set up the way they are. We're not actually trying to prove anything. We're trying to falsify things. And so we know what it takes to falsify a claim. So what I'm trying to say is that these people that Bray is talking about, who Bray is talking about, they have this bias in mind, and they're trying to prove a narrative. They're not trying to falsify it. They're trying to prove it. And that has so many consequences in our very daily lives, and from the smallest point, about like your own personal belief systems, to the fate of this country.
And people are desperate too. They will go out and seek to prove
a narrative
by whatever means necessary. Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah,
before I jump back in here.
Yeah, Bray, I wanted to push you a little bit on this whole idea of like money and like he can believe whatever he wants because he has money. Trump. I think I want to push on it because I think a better way to evaluate it is to look at the context from which someone does something in this instance. So Trump is the context whenever he acts, does these things, is he's trying to attain a certain goal. Now, if he can attain that goal from behaving in this weird way, then he can get away with it. And so on and so forth. It's not like a unilateral, if I have money, I can do things. It's more like in the context of this particular circumstance in my set goal plan, what can I do to arrive at it? I think you've already touched on this yourself earlier with talking about like his supporters will believe anything he says or something like that. But I think Trump will not get away with it if he whether or not he has money, if he fails in his goals. That is to say, take the presidency. I think in the end, if you want to gamify this, if he creates a system, a way of playing the game that elicits failure, like he doesn't succeed in these goals, whether or not you have money, then you failed. I think money loosens things. I don't know if it's quite right to just say it's.
Let me comment on that just a little bit, okay? And just to keep this dynamic and the conversation growing and whatnot. Someone who would fundamentally disagree with you is Ian Malcolm. I know that he's a fictional character, but Ian Malcolm, otherwise known as Michael Crichton's stand-in, okay, like the author's stand-in in the Jurassic Park novel. So he, in the book, he talks a lot about this, a bunch more. In the movie, not so much. But his exact words were pretty much, do you want to know what the worst kind of wealth is? Inherited wealth. They do not understand what it took to set up that wealth. And so, and like the movie said, you got to patent it, you got to package it, and then you got to put it on a plastic lunchbox and sell it. You know what I mean? So my point here is that there is an argument out there against what you're saying, Trevor. Like the way that the obviously, once again, a fiction writer. I'm not saying that this is the end all be all argument, but it could be made, and I would happily make it. The karate master has, he starts off in his younger years wanting to know how to kill people, and then by the time he's done with his training and by the time he has figured out how to kill people, he knows not to. And so that's what he means by inherited wealth is the worst, like, plague. You know what I mean? Because these people do not grow up enough in the time frame in which they have that kind of power. And the God of America are those green gentlemen, those Benjamins, and so on. Like that is the religion of this country. And it's disgusting.
It's true. I will say though, a lot of this goes over to what I said initially with Bray. What Bray initially had said that I wanted to press him on was this idea that because he has money, he'll get away with it. That sort of thing. If I understood
But he
correctly.
has,
Not that he'll get away with it. It's that what I mean to
He'll
say is that
succeed.
Trump has the resources to fuel whatever he needs to even convince himself of the narratives that he's crafting.
Yeah, it's true, but he could still lose the presidency. And I think that's
I'm
what
not saying
refuse to
that
accept
it's riding on his resources. I'm just saying that he has the
And then start a riot.
capability to convince himself. We are at a disadvantage as people who are not wealthy because we are constantly reminded of the truth of reality at every step because we are limited in our
bump
resources.
into it every step.
You know,
are we not wealthy?
Trump was literally the president of the United States. There are few people above him who have more resources to essentially do whatever they wish or believe whatever they wish.
Well, the difficulty with wealth is, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying, but the difficulty with wealth is it's a game of comparisons. Now, you're going to compare me to Trump, then I'm not wealthy, but I am really considerably more wealthy than most people on this planet.
Well,
and
so
the same
Trevor,
with both of y'all.
Let me leap in just one quick other way here. We talked last week, and I decried that you live in a synthetic cave. You know what I mean? and that's true. You look down at the carpet in your house or apartment, and that is synthetic grass, and so on, and blah blah blah. So what Bray is trying to say? Let me encapsulate this for the listener, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying to get it down to a good, nice place. Is that kind of resource insulates you from the natural world where you bump into reality literally every time you wake up. I can't. I completely see where Bray's coming from on this exact issue. In other words, like scalpel sharp, this exact issue. I know that he and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of, say, economic things, but on this issue, I get it. Whenever we wake up in the morning, we have to understand that we must both feed and clothe and shelter ourselves. Whereas someone like Trump wakes up in the morning knowing that those things are well in hand. He is so insulated from reality, it's pathetic. And therefore, he really, truly could be as delusional as he seems.
Exactly. That's what I mean to say is that it is far easier, arguably, for him to be convinced or even convince himself of this narrative, not just because of the money, but because the power and the influence that he holds as well. He spoke some words and people descended upon the Capitol.
That's what I meant by interjecting earlier, is that, he can say something and cause a riot.
I could not remotely do the same thing. I might be able to get my dog to come inside when I say, come on, or I might, get my cat's attention when I say, whatever.
Cat.
But I am far from the capabilities of Trump when it comes to using resources. Now, I do appreciate your note, Trevor, that you said about being wealthy in other manners. And I would say that the way in which perhaps we could say we are wealthy in a different manner is that, or at least that way, if I'm understanding you correctly, helps ground us even more in reality. By being, I guess, I hate to use the word intellectually, or at least philosophically minded, critical thinking skills, whatever, if I'm understanding you correctly. But let me pull myself back from this really good juncture we just had there and talk about my worst feeling from the debate.
Yes, please.
Because I would like to be critical of basically all liberal politics for the last however long. Obviously, my worst feelings from the Trump side are Trump is terrible. He's very dictatorial. Like,
Bray is the definition of orange man bad.
No structure, orange man bad. Like, things are just it's so obvious to me. Like, you could not raise more alarms and flashing red lights or whatever. That's old hat. My worst feeling from this is that literally the only reason that I'm voting for Harris is because voting for a third party candidate is not sufficient right now, and she's literally the only option I have to stop Trump from being the president. Like, she's neoliberal. I don't. She's just like every other candidate that we've had for the last election cycles. Nothing will change fundamentally, at least. That might change a little bit, or that might change a little bit, but fundamentally, nothing is changing. There has been no sufficient response to the Donald Trump candidacy from the Democratic Party in this country.
Yep.
Trump, here's our Overton window right here, and we've got left, right, and Donald Trump came into the Republican Party and dragged the Overton window even further right than it already was in this country. And Democrats are going, well, I guess we're just going to keep doing the same thing we've always been doing, and Orange Man bad, vote for us, And I get all of the criticisms from people who are leftists about we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Like, Democrats have got to pull it back. The fact this is, and I'll let you respond, Trevor, after this. The fact that Donald Trump has the gall and honestly the the stupidity to go on, but it doesn't matter if he believes this or not. Again, his base will take it and run with it. The gall that he has to go on the stage and call Kamala Harris a radical left communist comrade candidate.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Again, like from the previous episode, he either doesn't care enough about, he either doesn't know what he's talking about or doesn't care enough about the truth of what he's talking about. But it doesn't matter because he's feeding into that continuity narrative like Stefan was talking about. This age-old communist bad, they're going to take over the country. It's Kamala Harris is the furthest left-leaning, most radical. And I'm like, you have got to be fucking kidding me.
So, Bray, I do have to push you on this. So I think bringing it to the Overton window, so you had said, like, we have to pull it back. The Overton window has been pushed this way. We have to pull it back.
Yes.
That's a terrible idea. Terrible idea. If you want to win elections. If what's happened is, and let me explain. If what's happened is the political language has shifted this direction, we should ask ourselves why that happened. What happened that led up to that? What are the environmental actions around us that led to this happening? We also have to realize that the voting bloc, the people who vote in this country, have moved in this direction. If you drag it this way, you're just going to alienate yourself from whoever you're talking to.
Well, it worked for Trump. It worked for Trump. He got elected.
The reason why, we could talk about, like, did it come from top down or bottom up? We should talk about this because when Donald Trump came in and came up with these like building a wall and all that, was it that he created it out of thin air? Like, Donald Trump is the wellspring out of these ideas? Or is it that there were problems in our country at that time period that he was addressing in his own funny, silly way, which then created this political situation? It's a little bit of a circular loop because once he gets famous, whatever he says becomes gospel and then it kind of carries off. But I do believe that we necessarily had problems. Everyone always has problems. Every country always has problems at any point in time. At 1458, look at the socioeconomic policies of Spain. I don't know. Like, you can talk about whatever you want. Everyone has problems. And I think the problem at that time period in 2016 was in fact there when it came to immigration along the Mexican border. That was actually an issue for a lot of Americans. And when that comes up, it creates a situation that empowers people like Trump to speak, especially if, like, the main political groups don't speak. I can't help but recall right now, Reform UK, that political group in the UK right now, that came up into existence because both the right and left-leaning political parties in the UK were completely not addressing issues that were of very serious concern to the right-leaning side of the population, and sometimes even the left-leaning side, like serious issues involving immigration, again, and this time in the UK, where basically the Conservative Party were just not addressing it. Immigration was very, very, very profound in the UK the last couple of years. And then all of a sudden Reform UK suddenly burst into, like, really exploded in the polls. It's because these issues weren't being addressed. So if you change your policies, if you try to move the Overton window, and like take it over this way. I mean, at the end of the day, is
You
your
have to do it
goal
gradually.
to is your goal to do this, or is your goal to get elected? Because those are two different things. Clean difference.
That's so. I understand what you're saying, but that would be just as easy to say a Democratic candidate should run on socialized medicine. Everybody in this country will probably take on some form of medical debt, whether you're conservative or Democratic. And honestly, I've said before on the podcast that healthcare is probably one of the most uncontroversial things I could go to as far as like a non-partisan thing that benefits everybody. But essentially, if we had socialized medicine is like one of the first steps in like pulling that back this way. Plenty of places in Europe have it, and yet somehow we have the communist candidate. Like that's ridiculous. Don't make me laugh. And yet she's not even running on socialized medicine. She may want to make some improvements to Medicare here and there or whatever, but she's not even running on that. And I'm saying run on that. There's plenty of people who would attune to that.
Not attenuate.
Just like people would attune to, oh my God, illegals are coming across the border.
I think you've picked a really bad example. I don't think people have decided on that at all. I think there are a lot of Americans, a lot of Republicans
I'm not decided
right now.
about people coming across the border. Like it doesn't bother me as much as
true. But we're talking about
not being able to pay for medical.
Well, so here's the thing, Bray, you're a singular individual. What we're talking about right now is what you need to do in order to become elected as president of the United States.
You don't think that millions of people would support socialized medicine in this country?
I think millions of people would, and I think millions of people would not. And that's the issue.
The same as for building a wall.
Not so, because Trump won.
You think more people support, but Trump won
okay, it's a little bit more
not
complicated.
Popular vote.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, because I'm not going to say that most people don't like immigrants or something. I mean, that's just not true. But I would say that enough happened. Enough of it was valid to get him into the White House in 2016. That happened. Mm-hmm. It happened.
And we'll even take this as a counter argument to that. Trump won in 2016, and then Biden won. Somebody who, again, did not change anything about the Democratic platform, and did not pull further and he won.
I think.
Well, he was just not Trump.
I'm embarrassed. I think that I am embarrassed to have listened to what was going on. Like in 2016, for example, I was very politically minded. I was looking at what was going on in this country, and to be honest with you, I mean, I looked at what Trump was talking about, what these other people were talking about, and it seemed at least reasonable. And now these same people are making some of the most outrageous claims I've ever heard. I want to bring this up again, that Candace Owens has said, I'm moving away from the cult of science. And I
heard that too.
I remember whenever there was a time when her most controversial talking point is, I shouldn't be judged on my blackness, and I shouldn't be judged on my whiteness, and so on. And I completely agree with that. I will 100% stand behind that, and y'all know I will.
Certainly.
But I remember a day when that was her most controversial claim.
Yep.
And so whenever Bray talks about the Overton window, and whenever Trevor is talking about, that's actually a really horrible idea. So two things. One, you're both right, in my opinion. Trevor is, without question, right about the election business. If what's your goal, getting elected or doing this, that, or the other, and they have to have their head in the game, in a lot of ways that way. I'm not saying that Trevor's right or wrong about the chances of getting elected. I'm just talking about, like, you have to have those goals in mind. But look, I think that the cause behind this crap is not what you guys are talking about. I think it's cultural. I think that we in America have some very deep identity problems. Like, we have problems with our identity. We have problems with our culture. I mean, like, some very deep problems. There's a reason why we have school shooters. we have very deep cultural problems. There's a reason why we have, I mean, like, these disgustingly rich people in our country. It's because the American people keep supporting them. I'm sorry if that offends you, even Bray. Like, I'm sorry, but get over it. Like, like, we keep supporting
It's
the
true.
wrongest people available. Like, my students know for a fact that I hate Kanye West with a passion. And a student came in the other day wearing a Kanye shirt, and I made him go outside and turn it around, like turn it inside out. I'm not looking at it. In my job, in my atmosphere, I do not have to look at a neo-Nazi in my classroom. I'm not going to put up with that. We keep buying his merchandise. We keep buying his fucking shoes. Okay? Like, why? I mean, separate the artist from the art, the art from the art. Bullshit. You keep buying his merch. Why do we keep supporting these people in our fucking country? It's because we have some very, very deep-seated cultural problems. And it's so easy to blame something. It's so easy for me to blame religion, for example. But I have to know at the end of the day that is not the only cause. It can't be. We have some very deep cultural problems. I think that's the issue.
100% agree. 100% agree. Totally. And to the point that Trevor and I were going back and forth about, like, absolutely, electability is very important. You can't even do anything if you don't get elected, which is why I would prefer, first and foremost, Trump is not reelected. Say whatever you want, which is probably where we need to get into is it better to do anything to win before we wrap up?
For sure. In our last few minutes.
Get elected first, and then let's worry about change. To my point, I'm worried about once they get elected, nothing will change.
Right.
Which is why I continue to say, to your point, rather, Trevor, the change will not come from a third party candidate going out and saying, vote for me, vote for me. First of all, they're not going to get elected. Exactly like you're saying. That's going to have to come in a
what
different
Bray is
fashion.
saying, and of course he's right, is that Trump came in and changed what it meant to be part of the Republican Party.
Right.
And
he redefined it.
So someone must do that, or not, for the Democratic Party.
Someone must do it for the Democratic Party, and preferably sooner rather than later.
Sure.
Bring us to the next topic, perhaps, or the
for our last few minutes, and this has actually worked out perfectly. We've talked about the debate for an hour. I want to wrap up with this surprise question I had for my fellow co-hosts. Bray and Trevor did not know about this question until an hour ago, and so I said we need to visit or revisit the topic: does the way we win matter? Is it okay to do anything to win? For example, I would ask Bray right now, is it okay to run as Vice President Harris is doing with this kind of moderate tone and then change things whenever she gets in office? Is that dishonest? And for Trevor, I would ask a different question maybe. Is it acceptable for someone like Trump, either lying or suffering from a delusion, to keep claiming that he's won this election? I mean, what I want to do is really stick it to both of you. Trevor, I really want to stick it to you that, you're always talking about, like, this is where he forms his ideas from. This is the box from which he gets all his ideas. And you know how badly I push back against that. So I want to do it again. Okay. Like, is it okay at the end of the day? Fundamentally, is it okay that he does that? And like I said, for Bray, the question is about honesty.
Well, if I were to go first, unless Bray really feels
no, Trevor, you go first.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, and so when we say, is it okay? It's all, is it okay? It's in relationship to something. When I say anything, it's in relationship
to us. It's in relationship to us.
Well, first let me approach it from Trump's point of view, because I think at the end of the day, that's what matters in the context of what Trump is doing. So what Trump does is, what Trump's goals are fundamentally, from what I can see from him, is he wants to become the president, clear as day. That's his planned assertion.
Right.
And within the confines of that, if that is all that makes him, if there isn't like another set of things that assemble him, and I'm sure there are. Let me simplify it a bit, though. If we just say that his goal is just to become the president, then whatever he says and whatever he does fits within the overarching context of that, trying to become the president. So from that perspective, he could say whatever he wants if it makes him president, and that's all that matters. If I were to look at it from that point of view. But for myself, if you could help me understand the question a little bit more, is that okay? Is it okay
So
that
let me maybe rephrase it a little bit.
Please.
Right? So the way that I talk about this to people and to you now, dear listener, is that if you are even remotely on the bell curve of conscientiousness, industriousness, you know, those really big qualities in like psychology. If you were remotely on the bell curve, like just a little above average, a little below average, you know, right on it, whatever you want to call it, you cannot presently imagine the kind of hyper conscientiousness that comes from these people. I'm talking about people like Bezos and hate to say it, but elongated muskrat and you know, Trump and these other people. If you are remotely on that bell curve, you cannot imagine what a 60-hour or 70-hour work week looks like without breaking a
Stefan,
sweat.
he's the candidate for the working people.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Like you cannot imagine what goes through his head about being this conscientious, conscientious. Excuse me. And so my question to you, Trevor, is it okay that he has got this altar, right, of becoming the president? He's willing to sacrifice anything to get there, including me and you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, that seems like an apt description of what he's doing.
But what about the utilitarian argument, Trevor? What about literally the rest of us?
Certainly.
Or to your point too, Trevor, about the whole, you know, one of your biggest hangups is the January 6th thing. When he was presented with that question in the debate, he literally said, I had nothing to do with that. That was others that did that.
Yes.
You know, I had nothing.
Sure. So, I mean, for me, from my perspective, the wellspring from which I feel and I think, it's reprehensible. All of it is. I can't encounter any of it without being disgusted with this by anything. Everything involving January 6th. It just disgusts me. That's all it is.
And my reply to that is, you can't imagine his qualia. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, at what point does it become a disgusting delusion that we need to resist?
Specifically, Trump's discussed delusion over what is and what isn't happening.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as soon as you see it as so, there's nothing else to be said. As soon as you identifying it as a disgusting illusion, you need to start talking about it. You need to start sharing it with people.
But is there anything inherently wrong with what he has done and doing?
Inherently wrong?
I think
so. That's a very difficult question.
I mean, Trevor, you and I have fundamentally the same question, just in a different format.
I think,
you know, yeah.
I think that what you've just said, is it inherently wrong, is a very, very fundamental and a very long discussion sort of question. Because so here's the thing. So Donald Trump and where he exists and the space he exists in may not necessarily see it as an immoral act, and he doesn't think of it as so.
I don't think.
In fact, he may have corroborated it if he is in fact a serious narcissist. He very may have found that it goes against his idea of himself, and therefore he rejects it, and that's why. And by rejects it, I mean he rejects the idea that he possibly could have lost that election.
Exactly.
He rejects it due to his deep-seated narcissism, if that is true. And if that is true, then that is the place that he exists. That is how he exists. That's how he sees. That's how he is. And then, Steph, you've just asked the question, like, well, is it inherently wrong for him to do so? All I could say to that is that I, much like Donald Trump, am of the universe. I am not separate from it looking into it. I'm not something happening within it.
You're in it.
Or I'm not a bubble within a bubble. I'm quite literally of the bubble. It's all one. It's all, I am of this universe, just as he is. And I wish to put, it's going to sound relative, but I don't intend it to. I mean to say that Donald Trump and his reality is how he exists in this space, and then here I am over here, how I exist in this space, and all I could say is I'm disgusted by it, and he isn't. And we could have discussions as to which one is like what is more inherent, like what is more inherently wrong or something. But all that does is begs the question of, well, in relationship to what? What are you asking? What is your question? Because if you wanted to say like, well, how do you win the overarching most games? You know, if you wanted to gamify, how do you win the most games? You can kind of look at it in terms of evolution if you want to see it like that. How do you win the most?
How do you win the most games? By being invited to play. That's
Yeah.
the meta game of all games.
Well, that's a
And we
great
shouldn't invite.
soundbite. That's
we
a great
shouldn't invite
soundbite to
Trump
apply to
play.
this. Yeah. Well, that's a great soundbite to use in relationship to this. But you could look at it in that way. And if you did look at it in that way, you could say, well, if you act like Donald Trump, you may lose, you may win here and there, but in the grand overarching period of games, by lacking a moral center and a moral compass, you will eventually lose, you know, and you'll lose
Hard.
bad compared to everyone else. And therefore, he is inherently wrong compared to, not inherently, but he is more wrong compared to myself or you, because he lacks a moral compass.
See,
that's something you could say. That is something you could say, but it is in relationship to a particular paradigm from which we evaluate the problem. It has nothing necessarily to do with intuition. It begs a question when you say something like, "Is it inherently wrong?" It's begging the question of, well, what do you mean by that, and in relationship to what? I gave you a relationship to work with as you interact with that question, but the question initially doesn't necessarily lead us to that. I just provided it.
So I think one of the fundamental differences, dear listener, between me and Trevor, and this is seriously me just talking about this in a meta way, and we're being very friendly towards each other and everything. Don't feel like we're being mean to each other. I'm just the type of person who is ready, willing, and able to adopt Hitchens' language on this again and say he pinches his chubby little cheeks every morning and says, "I've got away with it. I've really got away with it." I mean, all I mean to say is that I assess what people are talking about based on what happens. Right? Last words. About that dishonesty business.
Yeah, so I was trying to play devil's advocate for myself and try to come up with a situation in which I would be like, well, it's probably not a big deal, but I think what it comes down to, really, take this point of view, for example. Trump ran on, whether he was attempting to do so or not, the base took this and ran with it. Trump ran on not being a politician because distrust of politicians was at an all-time high for good reason. And so Trump came in, this businessman who, despite having many, many, many failed businesses and multiple scandals, people disregarded those and said, look, he's going to run this country like a business. We love business in America. That's all we ever think about.
Cult of money.
Run the government like a business. It'll be great. And he's not a politician, so we can naturally immediately trust him because he's a businessman. Anyways, and he cleaned up with that. But the stark reality is that he is worse than your average politician. Arguably, from my position, because he will, he's seeking to make himself not accountable. He's trying to, like I've said before, this election is literally a deciding factor on whether he's going to have to answer for the crimes that he's committed.
Like in scouting other people.
Yep. Right. Exactly. Whereas if you are Kamala Harris, for example, I don't see Kamala Harris as some sort of dictator. I don't see her going for a power grab or anything like that. However, even if she says one thing and then goes in the office and does another, that's terrible. That deteriorates our trust of politicians even more. We need somebody who is going to be who they say they are and do what they say they're going to do. Nothing could be better than a candidate like that right now in the United States.
But
somebody
that would be
who is
super ideal,
authentic as possible. That would be super ideal. Unfortunately, when it comes to electability, like we've so nicely touched on already, that's incredibly difficult.
It's difficult.
It's very difficult to go up on the highest stage in the world and say, "This is who I really am. Please accept me, and I will do this for you." So at the end of the day, I always care about truth more, honesty more than probably that. And I couldn't possibly let us get away from this episode without mentioning this, but I'm reminded of a beautiful moment in the show Andor, in which, again, if you haven't seen it, I could not recommend anything more to you right now, especially with this discussion. But there's an episode where Luthen, who is basically this underground rebel organizer, he says something fascinating about what he sacrificed for the cause. But in the same vein of that speech, he says, I'm forced to use my enemy's tactics to fight against them. And it's tearing him apart because he has to do that, but he has literally no other option. And I think that may be the only case example where I don't know. I who's to say where the end really is, but it's hard not to sympathize with the fact that if you are fighting the Empire, sometimes you have to use their tactics against them.
Sure.
At the end of the day, will he be, it's like the Batman thing. He's going to be chastised and ridiculed and made into demonized for killing Harvey Dent. But he had to. He did. He's taking the fall for the greater good. I don't know. It's a moral quandary.
It is a moral quandary. And with that, I think we will wrap up. Bray brought up Star Wars, and and I'll bring up Dune. Be careful of messiahs; they cannot be trusted. Okay, I mean it, people.
Oh, nice.
You should not rely on a messiah in a political sphere, in a psychosocial sphere, or in a metaphysical one either. You should rely on yourselves. You should rely on each other. And so, therefore, you must take care of each other. Through this political minutiae, we have to stick together. Okay? Y'all be good.